There's a particular kind of quiet that comes after decades of being needed every single morning, and then, one day, not being needed at all. You start wondering if everything you spent a lifetime learning still counts for something, or if it just fades once nobody's asking anymore. This story starts with an old tool nobody has touched in years. Here's where it begins. The phone rang twice before anyone reached it, on a bent length of iron, hanging on the same nail for 46 years. The dust had never once been disturbed. Warren Tuck picked up on the third ring. He said little. He listened longer than he spoke. By the time he hung up, he was already walking toward a shed he hadn't opened in years. Dale's voice had come through fast, tangled, the way it always did when the boy was standing in a field, looking at something he couldn't name. A row of apple trees near the fence line had gone thin in the leaf. Dale had checked the spray schedule twice. He'd checked the soil report from the county extension office. He'd checked everything a young man with a folder full of paperwork knew to check. Warren asked him one question. How does the ground feel past where the roots would be? Dale didn't answer. Nobody had asked him to feel the ground before. Warren told him he'd call back. He didn't, not right away. He set the receiver down soft. The kind of soft you use on something you don't want to wake. Alma noticed. She didn't ask. Mornings had gotten long since March, since the auction, since the last of the machinery rolled off on a flatbed and Dale signed the papers that made 220 acres officially his. Warren still woke at 5. Old habits didn't retire when the man did. He just didn't have anywhere particular to put the hours anymore. Alma had learned not to ask what he planned to do with the day. Some mornings he found something. Most mornings, lately, he didn't. The screen door banged behind him. Same crack it always made. A sound so old in that house, it had stopped being a sound. It was just morning now. He crossed the yard slow, past the truck, past the clothesline, empty in the gray light, toward the shed at the back of the property. Nobody had stored anything in that shed in years. The door stuck the way it always stuck. He put his shoulder to it. Inside, dust, old motor oil, and under that, something sweeter. Cut hay, maybe, though there hadn't been hay in that shed since before Dale was born. On the third nail from the window, the same nail it had hung on, for longer than Warren cared to count, a length of iron weighted, bent at one end, fitted to a wooden handle, worn smooth and dark by a hand that hadn't used it in a long, long time. He didn't take it down right away. He stood in the doorway. He looked at it the way a man looks at a name he hasn't said out loud in years. Behind him, the morning kept moving. Birds worked the fence wire. A dog barked 2 farms over. None of it waited on an old man standing still in a shed. He reached up. His fingers closed around the handle before his mind finished deciding to let them. The wood was cool, rougher than he remembered, though the wood hadn't changed. His hand had. 46 years is a long time for a hand to forget what it once knew by feel. He turned the rod over. Once. Twice. The iron caught what little light came through the dirty window. For one long moment, the shed seemed to hold its breath. Then it let go. It was the smell that pulled him under first. Not the object. The hay cut green close. The kind that only smells that way in the first hour after the mower passes. June 1980. He was 22. The dew hadn't burned off yet. The whole world smelled like it had just been born. He was standing at the fence line between his father's land and the Larson place. On the other side, doing nothing that looked like anything, stood a tall, gaunt old man in a canvas cap. Emmett Lawson, a man 3 townships agreed was not right in the head. Emmett had farmed that ground longer than most men in the county had been alive. He had a habit of standing in his own fields, doing what looked from a distance like nothing at all. Young Warren had heard the stories. Everyone had. Emmett talked to his cows. Emmett wouldn't sell timber, even when the price was good. Once, Emmett stood in a hailstorm for 20 minutes without moving, just watching it fall on his corn like he was memorizing something. At the county fair that August, somebody mentioned Emmett's name over a plate of fried catfish, and 3 men laughed before the sentence was even finished. Nobody at that table had ever once asked to see his yields. Warren's father called him a queer old bird and left it at that. Easier than asking why a man who'd farmed 50 years had never lost a crop to drought, while everyone around him had lost at least one. That June morning, Warren was there on an errand. Borrow a piece of equipment. 10 minutes, tops. It turned into something else. Emmett was crouched at the base of an apple tree, one that looked no different from the others in the row. He had a length of iron in his hand, not much different from a fence post driver. He worked it slowly into the ground, a few feet out from the trunk, turning, listening to something Warren couldn't hear. Warren asked what he was doing. It took Emmett a while to answer. Warren would learn that was simply how Emmett answered everything. Ground don't lie, the old man finally said. People do. Ground don't. Warren didn't understand it. Not that morning. Emmett didn't explain further. He kept working the rod down, inch by inch, stopping when it met something under the surface that resisted more than dirt should. He pulled it out, walked 6 feet closer to the trunk, pushed in again. This time it went easier. He said nothing about what that meant. He just nodded, like the ground had confirmed something he already suspected, and went back to whatever he'd been doing before Warren showed up. Over that summer, Warren found reasons to be at the fence line more than his errands required. His father assumed he was slacking. His mother assumed he was sweet on one of the Larson granddaughters, none of whom actually lived within 40 miles of that farm. The truth was simpler, harder to explain to either of them. Warren was watching an old man do nothing over and over. Slowly, he began to understand it wasn't nothing at all. Emmett never once sat him down to teach him anything. That wasn't how it worked. What happened instead? Warren showed up. Emmett let him stand nearby. Eventually, he handed Warren the rod without a word, the way you hand a tool to someone who already knows what to do with it, even when they don't yet. Push it in slow, Emmett said the first time. Feel where it stops fighting you. And wear it. Don't. Warren pushed. 6 inches down, it went easy. Then it caught hard, like the ground had turned a brick a foot below the surface. Emmett watched his face change. Said only one thing. That's why your daddy's east field don't drain right after hard rain. Nothing wrong with the dirt on top. Everything wrong 2 feet under it, where nobody's looking. Not all resistance meant the same thing, Emmett taught him over the weeks that followed. Clay gave a duller answer, almost soft, even when it was hard. Saying let go easy, right up until it didn't, and then it stopped you cold all at once. Old cow ground, packed by hooves for decades, had its own signature, dense, layered, like pushing through the pages of a book. Warren didn't understand the science of it. Not back then. He only knew the rod was starting to talk to him, if he stood still enough to listen. One afternoon in July, Emmett knelt at the edge of a stunted row and pulled a whole plant free, roots and all. He held it up without a word. The roots stopped short, curled sideways, like they'd hit a wall no one could see. 2 rows over, in ground that had been broken up 3 falls back, the roots on the same kind of plant ran twice as deep, pale and reaching, hunting water on their own terms. Emmett didn't explain the difference. He didn't need to. Warren was already looking at it. There was a week that same July that Warren never forgot. The summer everyone else's tomatoes cracked open from a hard rain after weeks of drought, and Emmett's didn't. Warren asked him about it while they worked a fence row together. Emmett didn't stop working while he answered, which was usual for him. He said he'd pushed the rod down along that row back in May, before anything was in the ground yet, and found moisture sitting steady 18 inches under, held there by a layer of clay most men would have called worthless dirt, and torn up with a subsoiler if they'd known it was there. He left it be, planted shallow-rooted stuff where the clay sat close, deep-rooted stuff where it ran lower. Let the ground manage the water the way it already knew how to. Warren didn't fully understand the reasoning, not that afternoon. He understood the result well enough. 2 rows over at the Hendricks place, tomatoes split down the middle from all that water coming too fast in a ground with nowhere to send it. And men were saying it was just bad luck, the kind of year nobody could have planned for. Emmett never once said different to their faces. He just kept working his fence line and let his tomatoes sit whole in their crates at the roadside stand, which said more than an argument ever could have. Warren thought about that a long while afterward, about how a man could be right, plainly, provably right, and still get called crazy by people who'd rather believe in bad luck than admit they hadn't looked close enough at their own ground. That October, Warren tried alone. His father's east field. the low corner that always drowned young corn in wet years. He walked it with the rod, the way Emmett had shown him. He found the hard pan at 11 inches, running the length of the low ground, right where the water always sat longest. His father laughed when Warren told him. Said dirt was dirt, and a boy with a piece of scrap iron didn't know more than 40 years of farming that field. Warren didn't argue. He drove a stake into the spot and let it sit through the winter. Come spring, the water stood exactly where he'd said it would, 2 weeks longer than anywhere else in the field. His father never apologized outright. That wasn't the kind of man he was, but that fall, without saying why, he had the corner tiled. By the following September, that corner of the field stood taller than Warren remembered it ever standing. Full ears, all the way to the fence. His father walked the row once, slow, and said only that the corn looked decent that year. Warren counted it as more praise than most men in that family ever gave. Warren didn't tell him where the idea came from. Some things he was starting to learn didn't need crediting to be true. There's a kind of knowledge that never gets written down. Not because it isn't valuable, because it doesn't survive translation into words. It survives instead in the muscle of an arm, in the callus on a palm, in the specific pressure a hand learns to apply without ever being told the number for it. A whole life's worth of that kind of knowing can disappear in a single generation, not through disaster, but through silence, through a man deciding the world has moved on and nobody wants to hear it anymore. What happens to a life's worth of quiet, hard-won understanding when the person who carries it decides no one is asking? Maybe it waits somewhere, folded into the shape of a tool, for a hand that still remembers how to hold it. That August, near the end of the season, Emmett handed Warren something wrapped in an old feed sack. Told him, in about as many words as he ever used at once, that a young man doing that kind of work ought to have a rod of his own, not borrow an old man's. Inside the sack, the iron rod, freshly forged, the wood handle new, pale, not yet worn to the shape of anyone's grip. Warren tried to thank him properly. Emmett waved it off before the sentence finished, already turning back to his own fields, already done with the conversation, as far as he was concerned. That was the last real season they worked side by side. Emmett's health failed that winter. Slow at first, then not slow at all. By the following spring, the Larson place passed to a nephew. He sold off most of the equipment. None of the old man's ground sense went with the sale. There was nothing to sell. It simply wasn't there anymore, except in the hands of the one young man who'd stood at that fence line long enough to catch it. A door creaked somewhere behind him. No shed door in 1980, not the one he was remembering. The sound pulled him forward through the years, the way a rope pulls a boat back to shore. The light changed first. Warm gold cooled toward the flatter gray of a present-day morning. The smell of cut hay thinned into dust and old motor oil. Warren Tuck was 68 again, standing in his own shed, an iron rod in his hand. No clear memory of how long he'd been standing there. His knees ached in a way they hadn't in the memory. That was how he knew he was back. He turned the rod over once more, studying the wear on the handle like it might tell him something new. It had told him everything it had to tell a long time ago. He didn't call Dale back. He set his coffee cup, still untouched, on the shed windowsill. Alma was standing on the back porch when he came out with a rod under his arm. She didn't ask where he was going. She'd learned, over 40 years, which mornings were hers to ask about, and which ones belonged to him alone. She only said to tell Dale hello and to be back by supper, and Warren said he would, and for a moment neither of them mentioned that his voice had more in it than it had all week. Carried the rod to his truck instead, laid it careful across the passenger seat, the way you lay something that could still break. The drive to the old home place took 11 minutes, same as it always had, past the grain elevator, past the church with the new sign out front, past 100 small changes that hadn't managed to change the shape of the road itself. Dale was in the orchard when Warren pulled in, standing at the end of the struggling row, hands on his hips, a look on his face that Warren recognized without needing to search for where he'd seen it before. It was his own face, 46 years younger, standing at a different fence line, waiting on ground to explain itself. Warren didn't say much walking up. He never had been much of a talker. Some things lose their weight the moment you dress them up in too many words. He held out the rod. Dale looked at it, then at his father, not quite understanding yet. The way Warren hadn't understood at 22. Pushing slow, Warren said, "Feel where it stops fighting you, and where it don't." Dale took the rod carefully, like he sensed it mattered more than its weight suggested. He knelt a few feet out from the base of the near-struggling tree. Pushed. 6 inches easy. Then it caught hard. Exactly where Warren had known it would catch, before either of them said a word about compacted soil, or root depth, or drainage. Dale looked up at him, surprised, the particular way a young man is surprised when the world turns out to have rules nobody mentioned to him. 3 weeks later, the leaves on that row would start to green up at the edges, a shade darker than the rest of the orchard, the kind of change you wouldn't trust unless you'd been watching for it daily. Dale would watch it daily. He'd keep the rod in the bed of his own truck by then, propped against the toolbox, where he could reach for it before he reached for anything else. That morning, though, none of that had happened yet. Warren didn't explain the science yet. There'd be time for that. More time than he'd once assumed he had left to give. For now, he crouched down beside his son in the dirt, the way an old man had once crouched beside him, at a different fence line, in a different year. He let the ground start telling its own truth, the way it always had, to anyone patient enough to ask it properly. Above them, the morning light had gone fully modern. Clean, a little cool, nothing like the gold of 1980. Somewhere behind them, back at the house, a phone was ringing. Neither of them was in any hurry to answer it. Wherever you're listening tonight, driving home, or winding down before bed, we hope you spent some time with Warren today. Have you ever known something was true long before anyone around you was ready to believe it? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. See you in the next story.